Well, here we are, Radiometric Dating, the last full-fledged science chapter in the book. And in order to understand radiometric dating, you have to understand a little bit about radioactivity. So, how would you respond if I told you that the chair you're sitting in right now was radioactive? Well, if you believed me, and you're sane, you'd probably get away from that chair pretty fast, right? But why is that? Well, if something is radioactive, what that means is that the atoms, the molecules, the stuff that makes it up is unstable. Over time, it changes into another element that actually is stable and is not radioactive. So that's good anyway. But this process of changing, or decaying as we call it in the science world, comes with a side effect. As it occurs, a lot of potentially harmful energy gets released. And you can probably guess, we call this energy radiation. That's the reason for all the nasty things that are going to happen to you if you continue sitting in your radioactive chair. But this was the process that gave rise to the idea of radiometric dating. And you can kind of think of it like an hourglass. You know, you start with a bunch of radioactive material, and over time it decays into non-radioactive material. And based on how much of these you see at any point, proportionally in your hourglass, you can estimate how long the thing has been running. So this was the method that was used to get the age of the Earth to 4.5 billion years. And it's actually a very straightforward method. The math is actually not all that bad, all things considered, believe it or not. But this is where we have to be very careful. You see, the different radioactive elements decay at very different rates. And the elements that were used to date the age of the Earth decay extremely slowly, like crazy slow. Imagine coming across this hourglass and it's moving in super duper slow motion. It almost looks frozen in time, it's moving so slow. So you can still see the proportions. You could still measure the decay rate if you've got sensitive enough equipment. But now, to get an age, you have to assume a whole bunch of things that you didn't have to before. Remember, you're just coming across this hourglass. You were not there at the start. So you have to assume the starting conditions. You're assuming that you began with all radioactive material and that there was no contamination at the beginning. You're assuming that the decay rate has been constant the whole time. There's no way you could know that for sure. You're assuming that no radioactive material has been added to or subtracted from the system since the beginning. You're assuming that no non-radioactive material has been added to or subtracted from the system. So you're making all these assumptions that can never be verified, and that's the real issue with this methodology when it's applied to such enormous timescales. Now I don't want you to get the wrong idea here. These dating methods are not useless. Carbon dating has been demonstrated to be accurate to about 4,000 years ago. And what I mean by that is that it's been proven to give reliable results to things that we know the ages of because they've been historically documented. You can't just say that it's accurate back to 50,000 years ago when there aren't any written records from that period of time to cross-check your dates with. Carbon is interesting, though. In the same way that organic material breaks down very quickly over time, carbon decays very quickly. So much so that if we date dinosaur fossils that are millions of years old, we would not expect to find any radioactive carbon still there. It should have long since decayed to the point where our machines just can't detect it anymore. Well, guess what we find in these supposed 65 million year old dinosaur fossils? Guess what we find in coal seams that are supposedly hundreds of millions of years old? Guess what we find in diamonds that are supposedly billions of years old? We're finding significant amounts of radioactive carbon. But it can't be there if those millions and billions of years of time are true. And folks, in the end, what this really points to is that we all need a healthy dose of humility here. We have to recognize that, yes, radiometric dating methods can be useful when appropriately cross-checked with historical data. But we have to realize that we're working under a lot of assumptions when we choose to go beyond that timeline.